Call to order the special meeting of the Cordova Recreation Park District we're going to be doing the fiscal year 2023-2024 preliminary budget work session. 4:33.
Thank you. First, we're going to take a look at our standing action item for any AB 2449 requests, and seeing none, we'll take no action.
All right, roll call.
Director Mattis, Director Langen,
Here.
Secretary Sloan,
Here.
Vice Chair Danzel,
Here.
Chair Yearwood.
Here. All right.
Thank you. At a special meeting, the public comment period is limited to only those items described on this agenda per California Government Code. Members of the public may comment when the items are heard. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. The board is prohibited from discussing or taking action on any item not listed on this agenda. And so far, we have no request.
All right. So I guess we'll move to item C, the work session.
Thank you. Item C is a work session for fiscal year 2023-24 preliminary budget. And I'll turn it over to CFO Goodell.
Good evening or good afternoon. Yes, so Chair Yearwood and board members. Welcome to the 65th budget workshop. Woo-hoo. I was not at all of them. I've been one in the last 12.
You have to make a public records request for that.
And we're gonna bring this up on everyone's screen, hopefully soon. Give it a shot here. So ground rules, it's workshop, so I'm okay if anybody wants to pause the presentation and discuss, question, comment at any point. You have to wait till the end, so if we're on a particular section that you want to talk about, I'm gonna basically follow what was in the package. Just kind of break it down as we go through and give more detail, so if you want me to stop, just let me know. And with that, I think is Daniel are you trying to switch it or? Is it on everyone's screen?
Switching. Thank you. There you go.
There we go.
There we go.
All right, so the budget process starts in January. What finance does is put together all the revenue projections and resources that we have available. And then from there, we have committee meetings. We have a budget and finance committee that meets. We have a PMRID public oversight committee that meets. And we discuss what next year is going to look like, the philosophies, the goals, the strategies, the priorities, and that kind of stuff. And then based on that theme, staff gets together and departments put together proposals that we're going to spend on operations and potential projects. And then we get to, there's a couple of layers of review and acceptance and filtering, and then we get to June. Here we are at this workshop. And so it has a chance to have an open discussion, and then following we'll have the first public meeting that will hopefully approve the preliminary budget. From there, next steps will be that oversight committee meet again to talk about the budget to see if the public has any input. And then in August, we can tweak it between now and then. August, we'll have a second public meeting to approve the final budget book. So it goes from January to August. It's a pretty long process to develop this budget. And I lost my page down. There we go. People are curious sometimes about what is our process, how do we go about it? And now that we have new board members, I think it's important that we kind of talk about it. There's like 8 different methods that you can use. We kind of use a hybrid approach. And so administration, parks and facilities and our utilities, we use more of a traditional where we have look back periods and we kind of predict what those expenses are going to be moving forward. So we rely on data for that, trends. Where recreation leads activity based, and we'll take a look at what the customers and participants of the programs are. Kind of build a budget based on that. Understand how much staff they need, how many supplies they need, and what the cost and potential revenue would be. In the planning, in the capital improvement team, they do a priority driven, so they kind of take a look at the goals, what's important, what's safety, what's ADA contractual, has leverage and grant and revenue generating stakeholder staff input. So they take a look at what priorities we have for our community to put that together. So I'll start over. You going? Okay, all right. We'll pause for a second though. Recognize.
Thank you. We noticed that Director Mattis joined the dais at 4:38 p.m.
Indeed. Welcome to the 65th budget workshop, by the way. Also, staff is recommending that we max tax our assessments, so we have the opportunity to, freeze or continue with the max tax or something in between. And due to inflation, obviously everyone knows it's above that 3% factor that most of them have capped. So we're going to recommend, as those tax and injury reports come forward tonight, and then also in July with our community facility districts, that we recommend max tax those. Housing market's been amazing. Obviously, we went on a tour, we saw a lot of homes. I was counting them myself to see how many, see what that growth and potential revenue source can be. And so it's still cooking. Like I said, inflation is impacting operations. We're noticing that our expenses are higher than typical. And so we're anticipating that, and it's incorporated within this budget. Again, our revenues are kind of limited, and they're capped at about 3%. So that inflation is kind of creeping above what our revenue is. And so we'll kind of talk about what the impact that is. It's kind of created an imbalance. For 10 years, we've been able to build up our reserves. We've done a really good job about taking all the what ifs out of our budget, not fluffing them at all, and just spending what we need to spend and incorporating reserves as we go along. And we finally reached a point now where the expenditures of just typical operations are kind of exceeding where our revenues are. We're finally seeing that tipping point. But that's why we built those reserves. So for 10 years, we've been doing that, and finally, we're probably going to see our need to use it. I'm going to talk about where we potentially might not have to. That's some information I found out. But there are options that we can address inflation. One of them is we can reduce service and programs. Nobody wants to do that. We want to continue with quality service and commitment to the community. So that is an option. We can increase our fees and cost recovery, but then that kind of endangers people even joining the program if it's too expensive, right? Or we can start increasing our operations budget and lowering projects, not doing as many projects and taking those CIP dollars and applying to operations. If available, we can use reserves and fund balance. And then adjust the internal allocation plan. I'm going to go into that in detail later on, talk about how we do transfers, charging for indirect parks and having it over to the assessments. So there's some kind of internal funding we talk about how that's treated. I am recommending that we do a combination of a few of those things. I still think we have to operate with the operations budget requested, meaning that we have to incorporate those additional costs due to inflation. Also, we're going to reduce the internal allocation admin overhead fee. And I'll get into that, what that means later on. And then use reserve balances to offset inflation gap. And again, it's our first time using it. It felt uncomfortable to talk about it first, but now I see that's why we have reserves again. And but again, I have new information that I'm going to talk about that we might not have to use reserves. So when I get to the reserves page, we'll talk about that. All right. Also, equipment ordering still has some lag times, and so all the trucks and stuff that we were planning on for this current year are still on order and have not been received or paid for. So we're going to see how that encumbering takes place in the next year. So I'm going to see what the equipment budget ultimately looks like, but we'll take a look at what the request is for next year. And we're also still planning on doing 35 maintenance projects. So even though we're talking about capital project and operation versus operation budget, we're still planning on doing 35 projects. Developing 4 new parks plus potential starting 2 new parks. And that's 6 parks adding up to 44. So that's quite a bit of development. And so even with inflation, projects must go on. And then of course we have the optimized plan, hopefully disclose with a report sometime during the year, hopefully by the end of the year, and we start really talking larger future projects and what we can be capable of doing. Usually I have 3 to 5 years of a look back period, but with COVID and shutdown and kind of who we are today versus where we were 5 years ago isn't even the same pre-COVID. Like I said, we're going from 44 to 50 parks. And so we're a much larger district even then. And so some comparables might not be comparable. We have to kind of start fresh and think about who we really want to be instead of like who we were and trying to build upon that. So some areas of analysts might not work. All right, and then finally, on the highlights, this is the meat and potatoes right here. This is the summarized budget of our operations right here. And so we do categories, and that's kind of important from a board perspective, because our line items might go over budget. As you notice on the monthly report, some line items do go over budget, and that's okay. As long as within that group, the bottom line is within the budget target. And so, if we ever did go over a budget total, that's when I would come and ask for an adjustment or amendment from the board. And so we have 8 categories. 10 is our labor, wages, salaries, taxes and benefits, and that represents about 41% of our budget overall at 9.3 million. And then 20s are service supplies and materials expenses that we have. That's about 7 million, about 32%. Debt service and leases is our 30 group, and that is 752,000, about 3%. So it's a pretty good ratio overall of what our debt is in comparison to our overall budget. So okay with that. And then we have our fixed assets in the 40s group, capital improvement projects 42, and our equipment under 43. And that represents about 23% of our budget. Transfers, I'll get into exactly what that means later on. And then resale items represents 1% of our budget, mostly the Cordova Golf Course Pro Shop at 108,000. And then it's balanced out with our revenue and resources. So our overall budget we're talking about this year is $22.3 million. Okay. So let's get into it. For labor and wages, there are 4 requests for new personnel for full-time positions. One is kind of under my umbrella. It's a management analyst position. I was down a staff person for over a month and it really impacts my department. We tried to survive for a couple of weeks, taking on that workload with the 2 of us, and it just wasn't working. So we received temporary help, and that was just a boost in the arm. And it made me realize the need that we need to have really solid backup and someone to maybe even take on a larger role to help out with other departments in the form of contract management, RFPs, and procurement. And so we're establishing a position for that for next year. We like that to happen. And then Parks is asking for 3 personnel, 2 PM, 1 workers to help out with Hagen Community Park in particular, and also to help prepare our rentals. You know, property rental is a very big revenue stream for us. And the better our picnic areas and pavilions and our rentable facilities are, the better. So that's what we're looking for someone to be more specific for that. And then mechanic at the courtyard to get help with our 1 mechanic that we have currently. And so those are the 4 full-time positions being requested. So how that looks on the overall scheme, the blue is what we've had for the last 3 years. The orange is what we added this year. And then the green is what's being proposed for those 4 spots, for a total of 68 positions. And so I have a staffing plan that shows all our positions and how many we've had in the last 5 years and how many we are planning on changing. There are a couple that are being promoted. And so we have a PM1 going to PM2 being requested, and then facility supervisor to facilities manager. And then the added position of the analyst and the mechanic and the PM1. And so again, bottom line, it's going from 64 to 68 from last year. And also, let's see, we have kind of a new look to our charts. If I can get it on the screen here. We put the most important people on top: the public, the board of directors, and general manager. And then we have the layer of a management leadership team. We didn't show that before, and so that's a very important component of our district. And so it shows those 5 people. And then we have our recreation and park superintendent, and then we have our departments laid out. So we have parks and facilities, recreation department, golf course, marketing, human resources, budget and finance, and parking planning. So parks, obviously our largest, recreation, golf, and then our admin departments. So there's a pretty good layout of exactly all our positions that we have on staff, all 68 positions. We have an equivalent part-time of 48 full-time. I think that's the next chart I have. Not too much changing in recreation part-time. I think there's a request about 2,900 additional hours. So it's relatively, I think it's building up our aquatics program a little bit in recreation programs, and some additional at the golf pro shop as well. Parks is remaining status quo. The only difference in spike in this graph that took place was in 2021 with parks, is that we converted some part-time to full-time. That's why they had a big drop in that year. But otherwise, we're pretty much steady in part-time. As a matter of fact, I think the next chart shows the changes. So again, more in aquatics and lifeguards. That's the biggest change. And only really adding about 1 full-time equivalent compared to last year, 47 to 48, 2,900 hours. So not too much change there. All right, so that's the tens group, going on with the tens. In the twenties, this is the list of our 80%, our top 20, which represents 80% of our total twenties budget, service supplies, expenses. And water is our largest. We're a park provider, and so of course, water is going to be our largest expense. Not too much of an increase compared to last year. We really boosted up last year or the year before that. Just kind of maintained that rate, so it's not too bad in comparison. Next up is our contracts that we have with the landscape trails, the new parks. We use a third-party contractor to manage those parks, and so that runs in about $1 million at 15%. And then insurance is our next largest expense, and it covers our general property liability and our auto as well. And that one might even be a little bit higher going into the final. I think it's about 624,000 is what it ended up from 600. So it might be a tweak going into the final. From there, utilities, electricity. That was our biggest utility jump that we saw. I'm not quite sure if buildings were being used more or if that was a chance for electric companies to boost up the rates after COVID. Not sure, but in comparison to years past in usage, that one was kind of an eye opener. And then from there, we have rec supplies, rec services. Those are umpires or supplies that we buy for rec and park stuff. And some admin expenses too, as well. We have legal services and IT expenses as well. And then it's pretty self-explanatory. It tells you what's into those expenses that we have down the line for the smaller ones. The full list is in the district-wide financial statement at the end of the document. So it shows the full list of chart accounts and what the plan is for expenses. But this represents the bulk of the plan for what we spend. And if we take a look by department, parks is the largest, 3.7 million at 53%. So they're the largest. And of course, water is a big part of that. Administration is next, and that's because the insurance is in that category and our legal services in that category. It falls under the umbrella of the risk manager, and that's in administration, so that's where it lands. And it's some of the IT expenses. Recreation next, facilities, that's our infrastructure and our building expenses, and then golf course and planning. So that's where the expenses land in departments. All right, so that's the 20s. The 30s is where our debt service lies. There is no request for additional debt this year. We're just going to pay the 2 loans that we have plus the leases. So that's our loan that we established in 2008 for the Mather Sports Complex renovation. We refinanced it in 2021. And it'll be over in 2027, so we only have a couple more years left with this one. It's about a $300,000 annual payment, and we'll have $1 million left to pay off that loan by September. Second largest, well, it is our largest one, is the certificates of participation. We went after the bond proceeds for the pool project in 2018. This one's longer, it's 30 years, so we have time to pay it off. And again, it's about $300,000 as well. The 5.4 million that we received, add on the interest, ends up being about 7.5 million that we still owe, but not due until 2048. So that'll be someone else's problem. And then our equipment leases for $137,000 total. So larger equipment or mowers and golf carts, it's better to lease than to purchase outright. And so that's where these 8 pieces of equipment land between golf and parks. And again, it's $137,000 for the year. And the remaining balance after next year is what we owe left on these leases. So that's that. And then unfunded accrued pension liability. In 2015, we were required to disclose what the unfunded liability was and have been since. It has come down since then. And we are 85% funded, which is exactly where we kind of want to be. And so it's a payment that we have to pay because our net pension assets are less than the liabilities payouts to the retirees. And so we have to disclose that liability. All districts do, all cities, and that is our amount right now, it's 2.4 million. All right, fun stuff, new projects. So like I said, we're having 4 new projects, hopefully starting and completed upcoming, and then 2 new ones starting for next year. And we do already went through the process of having the names and know where they're at and the budgets for these. They're being insured key, the 5 of them are. So Exploration Park, Gold Rush Park, Hummingbird Park, Rock Rose Park, and then a new one in the ranch neighborhood that will be coming forward to you as well, 2 Acre Park. And then we are in control of the Grant Line 208 Versa del Sol Community Park that we haven't named and started yet either. And so development's kind of slowed down a little bit, so we really haven't started the trigger on those on when that one's going to start. But we are putting $3 million into the budget next year for that park. That comes from park impact fees. That's our resource for that. And that's what developers and builders pay for their permits, building counter, to collect those monies for that park. And then we give credits to those to build the other parks. So yeah, so 6 parks coming online next year. Very excited about that. And that's where they're located on the map. So they're all over the place in the new area. We drove around and took a look at a couple of them on our tour. And 35 projects. So planning and parks still going to remain busy and put these in for maintenance and capital improvement projects. We're going to benefit 21 parks and 5 facilities and 1 of our trail areas. And so they're listed in your package. Not going to go over unless you want to, if there's any specific project that you'd like to talk about. But they're all from playground to pathways to facilities being fixed. So yeah, very happy about those. All right, new equipment. It's a similar budget that we had last year. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 trucks being requested to the new fleet, which we're almost full and happy with what we have. We're getting there. And listed there is the type of crew that's going to be using these trucks and for what purpose. That's landscaping, sports crews, the aquatics, and playground park repair teams. That's who's going to be using them. And we'll be able to spread out our staff a lot more. Instead of having 2 or 4 people in a truck, we'll be able to spread them out more and get a lot more done around all the parks. That's the plan. Also a leaf blower, a mower, and attachments, Sand Pro attachments, and a trailer. And a top dresser for the golf to help out with the course greens and fairways. And so again, that's a typical project or equipment budget that we have that Parks is asking for again. All right, operating transfers. So what we do, and kind of the system we've been doing for quite a few years now to make it really easy for finance department, is we have general fund and golf course pay directly all these expenses, payroll and operating expenses. And then also have an operation transfer done from all the assessments twice a year when the tax revenues come in. And this makes it a lot easier of taking a bill and splitting up between 8 funds and having to reconcile that bill 8 times, just doing it once, collecting those amounts and then knowing what to transfer at the end of the day. And so that's kind of what we do. General fund pays for everything, and then we do an operating transfer to repay the general fund back based on the type of cost allocation. And so I have 5 areas in my cost allocation plan. The first one is direct park expenses. It's pretty easy. It's where the water bills, electric bills. It's our scheduled crews. They're tied to parks. They're tied to zones. We know where they're at. And tie their dollars to those areas. So that represents about $3.9 million. Again, the general fund pays for all the bills, pays for payroll, and then we do the operating transfer twice a year. The second category is indirect park expenses. So this is something that's not tied to a park. It's our supervisors, staff, superintendents, directors. It's irrigation. We don't know where the problems are going to be, but we're going to take care of them wherever they're at. So it's kind of an insurance policy for all zones. The mechanic, also does work on all the trucks, all the equipment for the district. So that's an indirect parking expense. That represents about 2.8 million. Then we have admin overheads. Those are our legal expenses, our insurance expenses, our departmental expenses, office supplies, that kind of thing. And that also is charged to the assessments as well. And I've lowered that fee in comparison to last year's to help out with the reserves, which we'll talk about in a minute. The fourth allocation plan is a subsidy. So in the past, we've done subsidies for the golf course, for some of the assessment funds. This year, there is one that we're gonna have to do that we didn't have enough money in one of our assessment funds, and that was Villages of Infidel. So the amount of revenue coming in wasn't enough to cover the operations direct, indirect, and the admin fee, plus the projects that were being requested. So the general fund, that's when the general fund kicks in and helps out. And so there's 261,000 to make that balance coming from the general fund. And then the last piece of the cost allocation plan is for a general special benefit. This is a requirement that was done in 2006 when PMRID was established that states that all our facilities are located within the PMRID area. And it's not fair that PMRID has to pay for those facilities alone. And our aquatic center, our Hayden Community Center, our sports center, senior center, everything's in PMRID. And so it was our tax engineers at that time put together calculations stating there's a 20% benefit for outsiders of that zone using that impacting those parks. And there should be compensation to PMRD for that. And so we use the general fund to pay that amount, and it's 20% of that 1.1 million that PMRD gets. So $235,000 that needs to be done, but we'll talk about what that means on the impact for general fund as well. So again, direct park expenses, like I said, schedule, staff crews, all our utility bills, the stuff that we can definitely tie to the park. And these are all the zones that we track. And then I know how much I'm going to do the operating transfer from the appropriate fund in January and in May. Indirect, like I said, mechanic, irrigation, contractual services, security services, custodial services, they hit all the parks. And so those are indirect. Audits, insurance, IT, departmental, again, those are all the admin and overhead expenses that are charged to the assessments. And then here's the subsidy. So Villages Infidel, again, didn't have enough funding for operations and projects. And so that was the amount that's going to be coming from the general fund to fund C if the spending plan happens. Maybe they don't spend as much money and that subsidy doesn't have to happen. But if it comes true to the plan, the general fund is going to be making that transfer. And the special requirement for the PMRD just talked about. So right now, the general fund pays for the facilities piece. The parks pay from the general fund, but then the assessment pays for the parks. PMRD doesn't pay in full for the cost of running Mather Sports Center, the Orchard Senior Center, and Hagen Center. So Hagen Community Center, the general fund pays for it, and then I don't get that payment back of about $943,000 from PMRD. So to me, that satisfies the requirement of contribution to PMRD and the amount of $943,000. So it exceeds that requirement. So there probably won't be a transfer from the general fund to PMRD because it's already kind of happening by directly paying that amount. So any questions about transfers? No, it's great because, like I said, we used to do a breakdown of invoices between all the funds. And you take a $10 invoice for an oil filter and split it between 9 funds, and then you have to reconcile $1 for each of the funds. It's crazy now it's just reconcile one item. It's the same amount as the invoice. It's easy, and then we just do the transfer allocated based on the percentages to the funds, and it works beautifully. So it's a common practice, and one that really helps our department and all the people that are coding the invoices too. So there's a lot less room for error. All right, reserves. So like I said, the last 10 years, we've been building these up. And so we have the beginning balances for the general fund, all our assessment funds, and the golf course. All pretty healthy, total $28 million. Fantastic. Also includes 2 external accounts that we have the park impact fees with the city, with the county. So that totals $12 million. So that account's pretty hefty that collected in that city. There's a lot of development happening right now. And that's going to go towards all the development of our new parks. That's where that funding source is for. We're going to end up the year pretty healthy at $34 million. Is my anticipation by the end of this month. Now, I'm filling with this upcoming proposal of using reserves about $659,000. But what I found out is that there are 2 assessments that I'm off on. I was too conservative on the revenues. Development is just continuing, and so by the time we're going to get the July report, my tax engineer just got the G report, and I was off by, let's see, 30,000 for PMRD, which isn't much, but 30,000 plus. Montalena, $169,000. So I'm showing Montalena using $114,000 of reserves. That's gonna be wiped out in the final budget. So we're not using $114,000 of reserves in Montalena. And then park facilities and services, that's our new CFD that takes all the new development annexed into that. I'm showing we're using 139,600 of reserves. I'm actually off revenue by 188,000. We have an extra 188,000 of revenue for that area. So that means that $139,000 is off the table. We're not using reserves in that fund come final budget. Some of the amount that's being used in the PMRID, the 373.6, is for encumbered projects. So technically it's money that's already in the tank from the previous years. And so the reality is, we might not be touching reserves at all at the end of the day. That's kind of the end story of that message. We might be completely balanced. And that's unbelievable because I look at the proposals and the inflation and everything, it's just everything's so expensive. And for us to be able to balance that out without using reserves is just, it's kind of mind blowing. So this package is worst case scenario. I'm looking for best case and being too conservative with revenues and the development being there for us to be able to levy the houses to have enough money to support the operation costs that we're gonna need. So, very excited about that. Any questions about the reserves, fund balance? All right, this is going pretty smooth. The biggest shift is obviously I'm expecting about 18 million in the account for the city fund. A lot of growth going on. It's not how many home permits are being pulled, and our fees about $12,000, and so that builds up very quickly. I'm showing a net zero change in reserves. We're using 3 million, like I said, for the Risa del Sol Grant Light Park. I'm anticipating at least 3 million in permits being pulled on top of that, so it kind of nets out to zero. That's why that one's zero. Maybe they pull another $5 million next year. I'm not sure. Yes, Mark.
So is that $12,000 per permit? That's full, that's the park impact fee?
That's the parking impact fee, correct? Yeah. Yeah. And that goes directly to us, when we ask for it to build our parks.
And what are we expecting on the number of houses to be pulled? Is that?
That's a hard answer, because I do get up-to-date reports from the city. And last year, it was just going up and up and up.
What was it last
In
year?
every development.
So you estimated about $18 million coming from that?
Right, so if you take that 5.5 million, divide that by 12,000, that's how many homes?
Okay.
Yeah. 500, something, I don't know, something like it, there's a lot. And like on the tour we saw, I mean, under being built, I mean, it's just going crazy. And so, it has slipped a little bit since January. They've actually stabilized a little bit, but, they're still pulling permits. And so I thought 3 million is a safe number. That one kind of doesn't matter too much. It's an external account. When it happens, it happens. When we build the parks, we build the parks. And so that one doesn't really matter at the end of the day, this calculation. But the other ones are controlled accounts. These are treasury accounts that we have control of. So they are important. And, so yeah, the general fund is expecting an increase in reserves of $73,000. So I'm very happy about that. That's kind of an indicator of when we would be in trouble. Like if we start draining that down, I thought we would this year. I thought we'd be using some, and I was okay with that. Maybe if inflation starts, stabilizing in the future, we come back the other way. But the fact that we don't have to this year, after 2 years of heavy inflation, I'm very happy where we are. I think we're in a really good financial spot. Wants to scroll slowly now, so what's that page? Doesn't page down. Okay. Here's a pretty graph showing that reserve fund balance. Again, the green line is the parking impact fee. That's the largest shift. Blue is the general fund. It's doing pretty good. The dip was because we had an increase getting the COP funds, and then we used the COP funds to out of our fund balance reserves to pay for that project. That's why it jumped and then came back down. But to have a $6 million general fund balance, I'm so happy about that. Like I want more, but I'm very happy that where it's at right now. Then golf course and our district-wide fund is the bottom orange one. The assessment, the darker orange one in the middle, again, I anticipate that to be a little bit higher because we're not using those funds, is my guess. But I won't know that until July when we get final numbers of what we're going to be tax levying And then I'll update the final budget book with the final reserve numbers. So that'll probably be the biggest change that we see between this preliminary and final. All right, resale, not much change here in comparison to previous years. The golf course is asking to spend $100,000. I think we went in 55 to 70,000 this year, and they're selling more than that. They're doing very well. And so we're going to give them $100,000 to spend in cost of goods sold. And then we have 4 other recreation facility areas that do resell smaller items. I do sales tax returns for these, so we do collect sales tax, pay sales tax, except the Major Sports Center, because they don't have a seating area and they don't sell heated goods or carbonated beverages. So, but other than that, this is what we have planned for commodities. This is a quick sales report, profit and loss. Green is sales and the red is what we paid out. So it's kind of stabilized, the profit margin has, and that's just because everything's gone up in cost, and we can't always increase our prices of goods. They're kind of controlled, and so it's still a good profit margin. That's why it's 100% basically. We're spending 108,000 and we're anticipating 217 in sales, and so that's that. And then finally, to round it out is how do we pay for these things for a $22 million budget? And so we do have tax assessment districts, property tax, park impact fees, recreation fees, cost recovery fees, grants, reserves, maybe not, that support those operations. And so I think I have a graph that speaks to that. Yeah. So our CFD assessment tax, 6.5 million is our largest. It's about a third of our overall collections. And the important part about that is that even if the housing market tanked, it's a fixed amount. So it's not tied to property tax value or anything like that. So that is a guaranteed amount with the inflation factor. So that is a very key piece of the pie for incoming revenues. Property tax, on the other hand, is tied to property values, and so if the housing market did take a churn, that one then over a couple of years past that, we would see the hit on that one. But of course, property values are still going up, and everything's fun and roses, and so it's good. And that's our second largest at 26%, 5.9. So we really depend on the tax money. Park impact fees, we're going to use $3 million to start the design of that community park. And recreation cost recovery fees, what we charge for programs and classes and rentals, is coming in just under 2 million. Golf course is bringing in 1.4 million. And landscape and lighting, another assessment tax, that's intensive May 3rd and our PMRID assessment tax. They're not CFDs, they're landscape and lighting districts. And so there's a little bit more involvement with how we get those passed, a couple more meetings. And then other revenue, which is insurance claims and some other cost recovery that we can bill as part of that piece. We're recycling money that falls into that category. Grants we're expecting and know about that we're going to get $669,000. Reserves, we'll see if we have to use it. The assessment tax money might go up and the reserve might go down. I show this from final budget. And the result revenue is $217,000. So this rounds out our $22.3 million budget. Like I said, yeah, sponsorships, we sell assets, we do surplus of all our items. We go through that process and other miscellaneous income that we get fall in that category. So something that came out of the optimized plan that I saw kind of caught my eye, that other districts track and they felt it was important to be part of the report. So something I'm going to kind of report out on from now on. It's how much we depend on taxes and looking at other peer districts that we were compared to the other 5. They're right in that 70 to 80% range of depending on taxes and then cost recovery for recreation and other revenue for the other piece. And so I don't know, it's just something fun fact to know. That's that. Everyone having fun, right? Okay, all right. Probably should have checked earlier. So that's really the nuts and bolts of it. It's all our account groups, what we plan on doing with it, and how we're going to pay for it. And so it's balanced. It has an operations spending plan for parks, recreation planning, and administration divisions. It has a capital and maintenance improvement plan, 35 projects and 6 new parks. Amazing. Equipment and fleet plan that supports park services. I know how much they appreciate their equipment. Our debt payments for loan, annual amounts that we pay, and our monthly leases that we do, that's in the plan. Employees with full-time staffing requests for those 4 people, 3% COLA. No plan for layoffs or furloughs. I just say that because we've done that in the past, and so I just want to say it out loud that there is no plan for that. Tools necessary, human resources put in a request to have onboarding software added to it, so that's part of the 20s cost. Optimized plan, hopefully be done this year and start assisting us with funding options for putting into our facilities. Again, there's a subsidy for the assessment for villages of Zinfandel. That's kind of a bummer part. And general fund's ability to operate with dry period financing. You don't know what that means. That means if we started the year with not enough money in the general fund to get through until we get our tax money in January, from July to January, the county allows us to borrow that money and pay it back with interest. And so luckily we built enough reserves and fund balance where we have enough to pay for all our bills, not have to worry about that. So that's fantastic. I'm glad I can say that. And then celebrating 65 years. It's our birthday this year, providing quality service to the community. So very proud of who we are and where we're going. That is my presentation. What? I know.
I want more.
Yeah. Okay, I do have more, sorry. I have a list of all my operating expenses if you want to see it.
Line by line.
Line by line, yeah. How we do it.
How many bolts did you buy or earlier going to buy?
And that, the one we were talking about, the village of Rivendell, the subsidy of the 261,000. What is that all about? What is that we're looking into?
Right, so if we take a look at the villages of the Dell area, and there's 7 parks in the trail area. We get $1.1 million from that neighborhood. That's the revenue that we receive. But if we just took a look at water, our contract that we have to pay Brightview for the trails, and then to pay our park staff, we're already past that point. We're already over $1 million. And so if we want to do any kind of projects, which obviously we have to do, there's 1 or 2 in the plan. It takes us over that 1.1 million. So we have to fund it somehow. It's got to come from somewhere. And that didn't include indirect park expenses that they're responsible for. And so the general fund kind of picks up the slack, and that's what happens there.
Well, it's only one area in the whole district, because there's some good. Last year, was it heading in that direction, or is it something that
It was, and as a matter of fact, we explored potentially going after another tax measure in that area. And for the most part, the residents were okay with the look and the feel and what was going on there. And it seemed like a tax measure wouldn't be a good idea, especially if the climate and everything. And happy with our services and what we provide and the look. So it just kind of made sense to back off that and just see if we can manage going through. I'm hoping with the optimized plan that we can think about strategies for maybe long-term fixes for any projects that we foresee happening in that area. Yeah. And it's still developing too, right? They're still building apartments, they're still building homes. VOZ is not complete. So maybe there could be additional revenue on top of that.
And then I had one more question.
No, you only get one.
Oh, I'm sorry, one for,
Just kidding.
on our org chart. Should there be an area where our legal counsel fits into that?
Legal counsel is not part of the org chart.
They're also not an employee, they're a contractor.
We're totally, okay, yeah.
So they're a contract for the board of directors and staff assistants. We don't have them as paid employees.
But are they under us, under the board? Or-
They're a contract of the board, and so our legal would not be considered an employee. We wouldn't treat them or add them to an org chart because of that. Similar to how we would not add contract services for our park maintenance to our org chart, even though we use those contracts to help maintain the trails and things like that.
Yeah, tax engineers, I use legal counsel for annexations, like, yeah, those are contracted services, so.
All right,
Good question.
wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. All right, so we actually have no public comment or anything, everybody. All right.
We have no members of the public on the call.
Oh, I can't believe it, what? Ridiculous.
Streamlined, 12 years, I mean. But this is a prelude, so next step is tonight, we're gonna bring a resolution, all the county required forms. I'll keep it summarized for that report for tonight, and that'll be our starting budget for next year.
Yeah, do you know, what was the budget 65 years ago?
It's so funny you asked that. I have the ledgers from 1958, and I want to say it was 300,000, something like that. Yeah,
That's big dollars back then.
yeah, 28,000 in salaries, and yeah,
Oh, what, how much is salary?
it's like 28,000.
All right.
Yeah.
So we'll just run down the line real quick. Director Mattis, do you have any questions?
Yeah, are we gonna discuss options or ideas now, or we do that after this? Or our feelings or opinions on some items?
Now is the time, it's the workshop, so yes, feel free to discuss any of your ideas or.
Yeah, so my idea was, I understand full-time pay raises, but there were raises the last 2 years of 3%. And I understand that inflation did go up, but it has gone down this year. And prices are still high, and that's reflation, that's something that we can't control on that end. I'm proposing maybe like a 1% full-time, and then transition that more towards the part-time staff. So that way we get higher quality staffing, better quality for the part-time, because that's where our services go to.
Is that a reference to COLA? Is that your?
The COLA, yeah. Is COLA mandatory 3%, or is that just a regular?
No, so that's flexible. So a lot of districts, they tie to policy what the inflation is, and maybe they put a cap on it where it can be. We don't do it by policy. I just think it's more flexibility to have the board and finance and everyone discuss it openly. See what it can be every year, as you see, like a lot of years we did do a COLA. And it's all about how much we have, how much we're capable of doing, and then what's right, and then what inflation, what's happening in inflation. I kind of don't want to tie to policy. But as far as the amount, that's up for debate. Okay, we'll talk about it,
Yeah, that's the one, and that's where I would like to see more of the part-time, but $15.50 an hour. I would like to see that go up a little bit more. So that
And
would
it
get
ranges
more drive.
too, that's just starting.
Yeah,
Right, so it depends on the position, like we have a park maintenance worker, I think it's $20-something per hour, so the scale, in fact, I don't think I have a scale here.
So, but COLA and what we pay part-time folks, you would have to basically change the pay scales for part-time and move that.
No, COLA just impacts full-time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So if you're talking COLA, so that it's not like as simple as taking 2% and then moving it, you would have to recalculate all the salary rates, things like that, is that correct?
Oh, correct,
Yeah.
right, for full-time.
The part-
You're just saying to bump up part-time as well.
yeah, I'm saying, yeah, for the
Share
COLA, like a 1% for COLA, and then for the part-time rate, raise that up, at least the bare minimum, so that we can get some better staffing in there. And that way it's more exciting and more, especially during the summertime for high school and college kids to find jobs, because, it is a competitive market out there.
Yeah, part-time is difficult.
Yeah.
So part-time is on a range as well as the full-time, and so it is the starting range at the federal, I believe, is it the federal or state? State mandated 15.50, and it's increased every year for the last couple of years. So we could put someone who is a returning staff, for example, or someone coming into recreation that is qualified to have them higher on the range, like step C versus step A, which would be the 15.50. I don't know how we would administer the exchange of full-time, COLA and applying it to the new range and it being sustainable and consistent with the influx of, it's kind of two separate, it's like an apple to an orange kind of thing. So the recommendation would be more about talking about how we place part-time people on the range. That's kind of dictated by what we have typically done through the state is the minimum requirement and then extend the range out. But it would be separate from the discussion about COLA as it relates to a separate animal, like the COLA only applies to full-time employees.
Part-time was part of the total compensation today, right? Yeah, so part-time was looked at against other agencies, and adjusted, some positions were adjusted
Right.
from that, yeah, starting rates. So we're in line with other agencies median. We're doing the same median strategy, right, with, part-time, correct?
Yeah, that's just where I want to make sure that we're getting. I mean, we look at administration, it's 21% of the budget and the recreation's 9%. And just want to make sure that all of those services are provided to the community. And if that takes bumping the pay part-time to fulfill those positions, I would like to see if there's an option of doing that or discussion.
Yeah, something I would definitely want to wrap in human resources, talk about, and also the management team to see about that recognition. Okay.
I know we've had an issue with finding people to work, it's been a challenge. Do you think by making it a higher hourly rate, that more people would apply? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, then that, or you can have your base, your federal base, have bonuses if somebody stays on, works 3 months. That way they get a raise in there, so that way there's an incentive. Or a bonus when they sign on board, and they stay on board, they're on time each day, they work each shift. They take an extra shift on, there's bonuses that can help sustain those as well.
We can look at that as an option, but I would prefer to look at it as two separate topics. They would have to be analyzed separately. From taking one to fill another is probably not the most appropriate approach to that issue. So we'll look at that though in terms of, if a 1%, what that would look like in terms of saving for the full-time employees, the difference between the 3% recommendation and the 1%, what would that in essence be able to go towards with the separate kind of pools of money?
Right, so it's $175,000 at 3%, so about 60,000 per 1%. And so that'd be $120,000 for the 2% knocking off, if we're shifting those dollars from that to part-time somehow, but I do know we ran into a problem when we weren't doing COLAs and minimum wage was going up. It was going from 11 to 12, 13, 14, 15, right? We're running into part-time, worker aides, almost to the level of a full-time part worker, a one maintenance worker. And so that gap was really squeezed. Part-time and full-time was pretty close. And so I know we did peer reviews of other districts and how that was. So we kind of had to like increase that through COLAs for the full-time. That's what's in place and it's taking place. But I get your point of the hiring challenges and how we attract more part-time is by increasing rates.
Matt, can I just add something?
Please.
If I'm correct, from when we did the salary survey, is that more people are looking for the full-time jobs now. And that's a main, one of the big reasons why it's harder to find part-time temporary staff is because they're going after the full-time jobs. And so that's why we're trying to balance out the budget to ensure that we have those full-time staff members so that we can have that consistency throughout the year. Due to the fact that that's really where our country is going is more people are not wanting to do part-time jobs, 2, 3 part-time jobs like they used to want to do. Now they're looking for that one full-time job.
Yes.
So what, and everybody knows that I've worked at the high school for many years. And the thing is, the high school kids, either they want to work and they're motivated to work or they don't want to work. And that's the biggest problem we're seeing, because this agency sat at Cordova High School many days offering jobs. And the kids were like, you're gonna pay me $15.50 an hour? That's great. Oh, I have to come in for a special meeting to learn how to do my job? I'm not doing that. I can't take Saturday off. I've got to watch my brother. So it's just things like that. It's not that you've got that definite divide and split with those high school kids. Either they want to work and they're gonna do what it takes to work, or they just truly don't want to work because they've got something else going on in their family life that's not gonna allow them to take, and it was funny listening to these kids, because that was one of the things I did. And they want full-time jobs during the summer, but they don't really want a full-time job. They want 8 hours a day, but they want 2 hours here, another 3 hours here, and so on. Because, oh, well, I gotta hang out with my friends because that's when they're off, and it was really interesting to hear some of that when, you know, so I understand what you're saying, and, but kids today, they either want to work or they don't want to work, and it doesn't matter whether you're giving them, you know, $22 an hour at McDonald's, you know, because In-N-Out is, they pay, I think they're paying $19.50 now starting, and they still don't have enough employees to work. I mean, so even at that high pay rate, they're still not wanting to work. So I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, watching it and seeing it firsthand, we could pay them $25 an hour to do that. And most of these 48, if I'm correct, are probably lifeguards, Ms. White?
About 70.
Okay, so yeah. Thank you.
I think Director Mass's thought was that if we were to offer more money per hour, we'd get a higher quality employee.
Yeah, you get employees that actually, you're competing with other industries that are probably paying more, maybe it's more exciting or it's more shift, whereas this way we can maybe pull those people that actually want to work as a lifeguard or at a complex part-time. I think you can definitely pull more people that way. And I mean, yeah, granted, yeah, I understand high school kids, but there's also other, you know, single moms out there, you know, college kids, everything else that are looking to come home for the summer, looking for something, and that would be a good opportunity, because I mean, if there's another job out there that pays $17 an hour, well, they're obviously gonna take the $17 an hour job.
So it's interesting to kind of piggyback off what Jill said. So 21-22, we had about 55,000 hours budgeted for park maintenance worker aid. And we couldn't fill it. And I think it's a pretty good wage, but it's right, benefits, the benefits of having be a full-time position. So we traded in that equivalent of about 12,000 hours reduction part-time to get, I think it's about 4 positions total for full-time that's equated with the benefits and everything. But yeah, people wanted to work full-time and we fill those positions. So this is going to be more enticing if we increase the part-time. I don't know,
Well, the other factor too is we're just off of the heels of a total compensation and salary study that we concluded just last fiscal year. The market to which we're in is in the range of competition. So for our industry, we're not higher than everyone, we're not lower than anyone, we're kind of in the middle. And so we're in range. If we decide that we want to go above the median, we would have to have a philosophical discussion about that and look to see what those impacts would be on the overall budget. So that's something that we could consider, you know, in, I guess, the final budget. But it would, as again, not be, you take away from the COLA piece and fund the part-time piece, because they're two separate pots.
No, yeah, that I totally understand. It's just, and also too, when you look at it, we're, what was it, 74% tax revenue. We don't make a product, we don't have a patent, we don't have revenue that's generated, so we only get so much a year.
Right.
And so if we keep raising costs on there, eventually at some point, like how you said, somebody else will have to deal with it. And it's just one of those things that down the road, we can't.
Well, that's why,
It's a position.
I'm glad we're not a district that ties inflation to our policy, because they're stuck with 5%, 8% increases, you know, and asking for their staff. They're gonna be squeezed so much, they're probably gonna start talking about layoffs or figuring things out or reductions.
And then
We never want to be in that place, for sure.
And so we're adding 6 parks this year. How many parks do we plan on adding in the next 3 years to come online?
About 35, no, not that many, but, so 6 next year. Parks, yeah, for 3 years.
So how many new parks in the next 3 years?
Yeah, they could possibly come online.
We had earlier in the thing, plus we just heard about today, another one that's gonna have to come up pretty quick, so I think it's 6.
What about 2 more years? I mean, it's kind of hard to say.
Possibly 10 at the most,
Yeah.
with everything in queue at the most, but it is dependent on the market, of course. Some of them are a little further along than others. there are some slowdowns and delays, especially with Arista del Sol, Grand Line 208 is actually pending out longer than we anticipated. But I would say on a less than conservative approach, I'd say 10 with what's in queue. Yeah.
What was you thinking about if we had, additional parks? What are your thoughts about that?
That's just more, obviously you're gonna need more staff, more down the road there, and so that's just more revenue. That's the same thing. You gotta get those taxes, and we need those rooftops, that's the main thing. Anybody else wants to go?
Any questions, comments?
More just a question that I'm curious about that I just realized when you were going through it. Why is the revenue capped?
Right, so when we go out to voter approval for an assessment district, it's a condition that's put into place there. It's a safeguard to protect the voters, one thing, and also to get it passed. We say we're, unlimited inflation or unlimited whatever, it might not get passed. And also important that we have some support, some funds. And it's common that it is capped at a certain percentage. It's funny because all our assessments are set up different. Some says 3% or greater, some say 3% or less. And some accumulate, so if inflation is at 4%, they cap it at 3%, you get to keep that 1% for the next year. So if it ever goes below 2% or 3%, we can add that 1% to it to get up to 3%. They're all different. I don't know which one's which, but it's set up in the reports that we're gonna see coming up later on and then in July. But yeah, they're all set up differently. And it just depends on how they were set up. So basically.
So is that industry standard is like 3%?
Yeah.
For the assessment.
For assessments, yeah, right.
Can I go back to the COLA discussion a little bit? So the likelihood, and I think we need to do a little work as staff to benchmark those total compensation study benchmarks to see which agencies are planning on giving a COLA. Because as the report ended, it was making assumptions that COLAs would be probably most likely in an inflation type of year. Most agencies would keep their employees up to that market, some higher than others. So I think we need to do a go back to those benchmark agencies that we benchmarked in that study, find out what agencies are giving a COLA and to what degree, so we don't end up falling ourselves behind again, which we were for decades, not the highest paid district at all. And as I said, we're in the middle of the market now. We're certainly not at the top and we're not at the bottom. And so I would hate to see us fall back as full-time and part-time under that bar if we don't necessarily keep up with inflation and or what other agencies are doing that we're benchmarking, and hopefully looking to recruit those people to our agencies from Folsom, from CSD and all of those which are in our industry. So something for us to do a little bit more research on before the final budget proposal to see kind of what those other benchmarks are proposing for COLAs. And then our recommendation will come from that, just so that we're educated on what the market is kind of bearing at this point. I think that would be a good.
Yeah, we kind of already started that. There's some other reasons why we're reaching out for other districts, and we were asking, are you doing COLA or not? And the decision wasn't made in all of them. So we'll go ahead and collect that information. That'll be very helpful. If we do a COLA, we're not going to do it until August anyways. We'll retro it to July 1st, but we won't do anything until after that August court meeting. So we'll bring back that information and probably bring it to the Budget and Finance Committee too as well before the final budget and kind of figure out what the recommendation should be. So.
Sorry, Lang, that was your only question?
Yes.
Okay, Secretary Sloan?
So, what I'm sensing here is that we've got two new people on our board that there's lots of questions out there. And when I first came on the board, I didn't know a lot of these things myself. And so they're finding out more about how the process of, getting an assessment passed, the measure passed, how it's, you know, it's tricky how you word these things. You can't ask for too much, and then we usually end up asking for too little just to get it passed, and then you don't know who else is gonna be asking for assessments out there, whether the school district or the fire district are gonna be asking for these same things. So it would be kind of, I'd like to see more of an educational thing for, you know, all of us to be brought up to, you know, pop up to par where with all the new rules and policies. And so that our two new members can have more knowledge about how the financing things work and how the voters play that important role. And the salary thing that usually we're not sitting here talking about increasing salary. It's usually the opposite, you know, the other way around now, you know. So I thought that was very interesting that we're thinking about that, you know, taking, what is it, something from robbing Peter to pay Paul, or something, take a little bit from the people who have the full-time job and give them a little bit down to the people who have the part-time jobs. And then I'm hearing that the part-time job people out there aren't that many, they want full-time jobs. I think a lot of them, when these kids are turning 26 and they get off their home, you know, insurance policy, and they are now, they have to pay their own health insurance and stuff like that, and so they really want that full-time job, if they can get it. I can totally get that, I understand it. Maybe we need more of a process of educating the kids that come in, the people that come in for the part-time jobs, to look at the future and build up something like that, so they can see that if they stick this out for a couple of years as part-time, you're right there knocking on the door for the full-time job. I mean, a lot of times kids don't want to wait that long, right? Well, these are things you gotta earn. I totally think that it's an interesting discussion. I think it's one of the most open discussions we've had in a while. So I appreciate it. I loved your presentation. You know, there's a lot of these things I see all these numbers and stuff, and it's like overwhelming. But the graphs help me to see things in a certain perspective. I appreciate your work in that.
Yeah, I try to break it down and simplify it and I love round numbers, so I try to make it readable and understandable and attainable, so.
Well, when you show this, the sales and the costs, but the profit's only like just a little bit above the cost, you know, in there, so. And I understand it because you didn't want to raise the prices too much because of, you know, people who, you know, are struggling out there. But we feel like the sales, we've had more and more sales going on, right?
Right, we do, yeah, we've increased our sales, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially golf, and that's where majority of our sales is happening, it's so minor, the team hideout and aquatics, but I can't remember what's that, yeah.
All right, the vice chair, Dan.
So Mr. Development asked a question I asked last year and we ratified it, but it's 100,000 to be.
Because I knew you were gonna say
It was having to ask. So I'm asking two things, so yourself and Ms. Nuns, is 100 gonna be enough? Or are we gonna have an hour?
Okay, but here's the thing.
No, I understand.
I know. We try to avoid having inventory, we do, you know, items that people need that day. And we do club sales, but only, you know, special order, so that way we don't have the inventory, expensive inventory hanging around, but price fees. But no, we think it's 100 is appropriate, and we can always adjust later on if we have to. Okay, we moved from 70 to 100 in the last adjustment, I think, so, I think we're good.
We're trying to avoid the old bags hanging everywhere.
No,
You know, so.
been out for the course recently. I know Director Langdon's also been out at the course. But you know, and it's not the old days where you felt uncomfortable walking in there because there was bags everywhere and it's like, oh, let me wipe the dust off that gym because it's been here for, you know, 3 years. And much better. But you knew that question was coming. So, because we did have that discussion last year. But other than that, Matt, thank you very much. It's very clear, very positive. I had a discussion with Director Langdon last weekend. And I was telling him, when I first got on this board, literally it was binders upon binders and an 8-hour day to go through the budget because it was every nut and bolt, literally page after page.
Let staff worry about that.
Yeah, but like I did reassure him that that can't, if we need that, it can be found.
Absolutely.
But it's not, it's not necessary, like, we felt that, well, somebody felt, 15 years ago that it needed to be done that way, so this is much cleaner, much easier to read, much
Yeah,
easier.
we even think bigger, higher level here for sure, so, and with optimizing about anything going on in the future, like new office, like we just have a lot going on. I mean, think about who we want to be, so. And we're doing that now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you should have seen the board packets every month when they report out how many bulbs they buy. First time I came to a meeting, I'm like, what is all of this?
So the threshold used to be $1,000, so anything over $1,000 used to have to go to the board for approval, and so, yeah, we've increased those procurement limits with, management, staff, supervisors, general manager. That's all fixed, so you don't get to see those board reports anymore, so.
And I appreciate that. I don't have any questions. I thank you for the presentation.
Okay.
I was hoping for a song and dance, but. that-
No problem, no problem.
No problem, yeah.
No.
All right.
I will say that Vice Chair Dainsel did tell me that you would like sing or have a poem. So I am personally a little let down, but I was.
First impression, Danny, I'm just gonna wait, it'll be second impression. I'll do it long, so, yeah.
All right.
Was there a quote in the beginning of your?
There was a quote, absolutely, that's one of my favorite quotes ever.
You went by it real fast and never got to say.
Yeah, it's a great quote. Say budgeting, you can have anything you want, you just can't have everything you want.
Who said that?
Well, when people say, hey, can I have this? No, you can have it. Just not everything.
Someone else.
Was it Warren Buffett didn't say?
I said.
His name is Matt Goodell.
I said.
That's who says
Okay,
it.
there we go. All right, so are we good?
Can we just do a little quick recap before we come back for final budget? Matt, can you kind of parrot what you heard here in terms of direction?
I heard a 5% COLA.
Yes, that is exactly it, yes. Can you just kind of reiterate some of the highlights of what we'll present back in final so that we're
Absolutely.
making sure they're heard?
Right, so after preliminary budget tonight, we're gonna take a look at what the actual reserve use is gonna be, that's gonna be huge, that piece. And then we'll research other districts on what they're doing with their full-time staff, if they're gonna incorporate COLA, what is it? And see really what makes sense to us. I guess we'll take a look at part-time, see what that means, but definitely we'll research the COLA and come back with the appropriate recommendation. Projects, I think we're fine, I hear need for any additional projects, those 35 are what we have on the table. And, yeah.
Does that satisfy everyone's requests and everything? Great. Thank you.
All right, see, so we're ready to adjourn. And let's see, it is 5:45.
15 minutes over.
That's okay. Thanks, that presentation. That presentation. Oh, boy.